Center for African Studies here at the University of Basel, and I'm delighted to engage these very interesting guests that we have tonight in a conversation that will kick us off into the discussion about migration and xenophobia. We want to talk about manifestations of xenophobia. We want to know a little more about the interests that are involved, the actors, and perhaps possible explanations that are out there for this particular phenomenon. So what I will do is to briefly introduce the guests, and then I'll ask them a few questions, and then when I have exhausted my questions, I will ask you to ask your questions, and then we will wrap up, basically. So on my right-hand side, Fiat had already mentioned her name, Katharina Morawek, who is originally from Vienna, which is a city that was described by a very famous Austrian, Niki Lauda, as the gate to Eastern Europe, whatever that means. I don't know when she moved to Switzerland, but since 2012, she has been co-director of Shedhalle, Zurich, which is like an arts outfit, an arts institution, which is committed to the idea of making public art and performance a gate to our critical sense as citizens and as individuals. In an interview which she gave to the NZZ, she's quoted as having said that she hates free-floating discourse labs, which is a definition of museums and arts institutions. In her view, an arts institution is part of the flux of social and political life. And I'm quoting her directly here. She said, "You cannot make a change without getting down to it, without relating to things." Now, what she does is political art, which according to her must take side and not simply translate, but really intervene. So I'm looking forward to hearing from her how Shedhalle has intervened in the Swiss debate on migration. So please, a warm welcome to her. Our other guest is Pierre Misago, who, like Katharina Morawek, is a globetrotter. He was born in Burundi. He studied and worked in the US, in Tanzania, and Malawi, and now he's living in Johannesburg, where he also works at the African Center for Migration and Society at the University of Witwatersrand. I don't know if people from Central Africa are also described as Makwerekwere in South Africa. But according to a proverb from Burundi, and as African wisdom goes, it's got no author, it's always collective. There's a proverb that says, "The reception has more value than the invitation." Now, I don't know whether he was invited to South Africa, or whether, according to South Africans themselves, he invited himself. But I'll be interested in hearing from him what kind of reception foreigners get in South Africa, and I hope that we can profit from the fact that he's both a scholar of the issues as well as, a party to them. In Burundi, people also say that dogs don't love people. They simply love the place where they are fed. And I think that could be a useful perspective to approach the relationship between immigrants and host communities. So please welcome Pierre. My first question is addressed to Katharina Morawek. Because you see, this conference is about migration and xenophobia in South Africa, and to a certain extent also here in Switzerland. Now, if you had organized this conference with Switzerland in mind, you might have called it migration and racism, right? Why do you feel that it is important to make a distinction between xenophobia and racism?
First of all, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. I've never heard such a nice introduction of myself. I mean, really, thank you. And I've been in conversation with the organizers of the conference before we met, because I was wondering about the term xenophobia in connection to my talk. And because what I would describe as the problem in Switzerland would be structural racism. I would call this structural racism, what we're facing, because the term xenophobia is used very often and translated into German as the term Fremdenfeindlichkeit, which implies, it's used very often as, I would say, to displace having to talk about racism, and instead replacing it with a very moral discourse on there is something foreign that we have to tolerate, and we always means like the Swiss Volksgemeinschaft, yeah? So like those who are imagined as, let's say, a really national collective in a racist way. So that's this is why I was asking about the terminology, and would like to introduce this concept of, or talk about the concept of structural racism instead, which I think can only be addressed, and this is the second part of my point, that it makes us also think more about political ways of addressing the problem, because if you talk about xenophobia in Switzerland, this is always a moral, it leads to having to tolerate someone else. And I think this is also leading away from a political analysis and from a political strategy, because if you address structural racism, you can very easily answer, okay, what to do about it. You have to talk about the content of school books, you have to talk about the personnel of institutions, you have to talk about different structures in society, different institutions, and different, let's say, ways of addressing this in a social way, and addressing inequalities, and not addressing, let's say, a psychological, socio-psychological fantasy of people.
Can I just ask you a follow-up question on that? Because you're a foreigner, but you are not visible as a foreigner. Do you think the term racism would apply to yourself in terms of what you are saying?
Mm-hmm. I think some German football, soccer fans would like to apply the term racism to themselves when they are displaced in the inner city while having a big, while claiming a lot of space, being the biggest migrant group in Switzerland, yeah, by the way. But of course, this has nothing to do with racism. It has to do with a certain discourse that is always placed that is connected to the labor market, and that is framed in a way that wants to establish competitivity and wants to problematize the relation of Switzerland to the European Union and to the free, let's say, free flow of labor, and to the conditions of how these labor markets are connected. But this has nothing to do with the history of racism. It has nothing to do with a social inequality as such, and has nothing to do with the colonial history of Europe. So I would say, let's dismiss this concept when we talk about, I'd say the inner migration within the European Union. But if we look at the migration from newer, I'm sorry that my English is so slow, I have to translate everything in my head before I say it. The migration of lower income groups that are part of the European Union countries who are part of labor migration within the European Union. There is a lot of, I would say, racism, especially towards Roma people and towards people who are labeled in a also, I would say, racist sense as they are, let's say, Balkanized. Yeah, there's a lot of talk also in Switzerland about Albanian people, and this is a very specific form of, I would say, also cultural racism. And I want to come back to your quote about Vienna being the gate to the east, because it was also, like Niki Lauda has a very famous historical predecessor saying that Vienna is, like the Balkan starts at a certain point in Vienna, which is Schwarzenbergplatz. And this is connected. And Metternich, who was the political arm of Maria Theresia, political administrator of Maria Theresia, and also spin doctor, he coined this phrase, and I would say this is very telling also about the colonial history of Austria, which has a lot to do with the Balkans and how the Balkans was, let's say, also colonized by the Austro-Hungarian monarchy.
Thank you. We'll come back to some of the issues that you mentioned. I wanted to ask Jean-Pierre Misago to comment on this distinction between racism and xenophobia applied to South Africa.
Thanks for your very kind introduction. Some of those proverbs I've never heard of, probably because I left when I was still a kid, so I'm not really sure. So what my colleague had just described highlights the conceptual vagueness and the contestation that surrounds the term xenophobia. We use it every day. It's widely used, but it means different things to different people. Some people call it nativism. Others call it ethno-nationalism. Others call it racism. Depending on who is targeted and where, in which context it is being played. In South Africa, probably because of the past, xenophobia is more used than racism. So xenophobia generally, despite all the contestation, refers to the intense dislike or hatred or fear of what is foreign. So the foreign element has to come in for that to be called xenophobia, because if you talk about different ethnic groups in a similar country, in one country, we call it probably ethnic conflict. Different racial groups in one country who are all nationals, we probably call it more racism. But in terms of foreigners versus nationals, it becomes more xenophobic. And in South Africa, it's more fatal xenophobia than anything else. But there are also other contestations in South Africa. Some prefer calling it Afrophobia, for instance, because they feel it's a black on black conflict, because it's mostly migrants from African countries are the ones feeling it, rather than migrants coming from European countries and or other countries. So they prefer to call it. It doesn't make it any better. It's phobia, but that's the official political line mostly here from political leaders. It's Afrophobia, probably because to hint on the blame of the white apartheid regime, it did it. It made sure that Africans hate themselves, and Africans hate other Africans. So that is something that is coming up. But from the research point of view, the hypothesis does not pass the empirical test, because we also have Indians, we also have Pakistanis, we also have Bangladeshis who are affected by xenophobia and different types of manifestations. It's true that migrants from African countries feel it much better than anybody else, but there are those groups that make the hypothesis not happen. Another conceptual clarification we need to make, which has very serious implications in terms of research and interventions, is between xenophobia and xenophobic violence. Because sometimes the confusion between the two leads to interventions which don't have internal logic. Xenophobia is an attitude. It is the way I feel about the other. And nothing can do anything about it. Is it a crime? No, I don't think so. Is it morally wrong? Probably. But it's about what we feel about others. Yeah. So, xenophobic violence now, it is a manifestation of that feeling I have. So I make a choice to act on my negative attitude towards the other by attacking them. Now that becomes something else. It becomes criminal. It becomes a violation of other people's rights. But xenophobia as it is, as a feeling I have, if I keep it to myself, fine. It's not okay, but it becomes more a problem when it is expressed through violent means, as we see it often in South Africa. So xenophobia is a global phenomenon, I think you would agree. But what is troubling in South Africa, at least for that world, some of us who live there, is that more and more people are willing to express it in violent ways. That's what we mean by xenophobic violence. And those who do research, those who do interventions, you have to understand those concepts differently, because methodological approaches to understand violence are different from those that will help you to understand behavior. Attitude and behavior are not the same thing. And attitudes are not a good predictor of behavior, because we have xenophobia as it's an attitude kind of documented across social divides, but you have violence in only a few communities. It's a big issue in South Africa, but it doesn't mean all South Africa are xenophobic. But it's a reality that is troubling many of us living there.
Well, thank you. I think that's an interesting point. It allows me to ask a further question, because you see, South Africa has a long history of migration. You know, people from different parts of the world have been living together in South Africa and apartheid and so on. But the kind of violence that erupted in 2008 and recently is a bit odd. So how is that explained? Why has xenophobia taken this violent form in South Africa? What are people saying about that in South Africa?
The violence we saw in 2008 was, of course, the most intense and the most graphic, but it wasn't the first time. There had been instances before where foreign nationals were attacked. And we have also to understand that if this violence happens in a context where violence has been used many times to resolve conflict. Dating back to the struggle against apartheid, violence was a means of resistance to repressive kind of government. So that I wouldn't want to call it cultural violence, but it's a reality that many people in South Africa use violence to resolve conflict without trying any other means of conflict resolutions. Straight violence, that's the way we do things. So when there is a conflict, many people use violence. I'm not trying to generalize to say everyone, but it has become some kind of a norm that conflicts, violence can help in some ways to resolve conflicts. So migrants have been there before, that's for sure. Tensions were there, but they didn't translate into violence because of many variables. For instance, one of the key issues at the moment is that many black South Africans who were not allowed to live in the cities before are now coming to the cities. And when they come, they meet us. We meet there. And to be fair, even if competition is not the only explanation, competition takes place. And for those scarce resources, South Africa is a rich country, don't get me wrong, but if you look at the conditions under which some people live, it's very deplorable. And those conditions, those poor conditions is where poor migrants also are going to live. So there is competition for those scarce resources. It's a very clear thing to see. Now, the competition is not the only explanation. The competition now becomes an explanation for poor service delivery by political leaders. So there is no medication in the clinic because foreigners have taken it. You have disease in this area because foreigners are flocking in. There is no housing because foreigners are taking over everything. So the foreigners are blamed for most of socio-political ills that the communities are facing. And most of that blaming comes from political leaders. And understanding the context that many people see violence as a means to solve problems, and if there are no consequences, that's sometimes what leads to. Now, we have what we feel is illegitimate competition for our resources. We haven't had the chance to enjoy our democracy, now you are coming to take it away. So we do it the way we know how to do things, which is our way. So that competition is there. Of course, migrant communities are coming in big numbers. Those are not the only explanations, but at least that's where we start when we look for explanations. We can continue, but that's the start.
Okay, that's a very good start. But it raises a problem, and I hope Katharina can help us solve it. Because Jean-Pierre is making the point that competition for resources is a factor in South Africa, which might explain violence and might at least also explain why there's this discomfort regarding foreigners. But this phenomenon of not feeling okay with foreigners in your midst is one that you see in many countries. So, for example, here in Switzerland as well, and you wouldn't actually say that there is much competition for resources here. You know, one question I would have for you is why is it that this problem is not taking the form of violence here in Switzerland? Is Switzerland more civilized? And the other question is, why is there a discussion about foreigners at all if there's no competition for resources?
Well, there is a big competition for resources. Switzerland is one of the most rich countries in this world and is also very proud of that, but is rich because of a history of displacing the violence that takes place when we talk about competition for resources, because Switzerland is rich because it extracts copper, it extracts different other raw materials, and is still in a colonial relation with those places where this business takes place. So just because you don't actually really see the violence in Switzerland doesn't mean that it's not embedded into the place itself, and into the history of the place, and also into the self-conception of people who think that they have the right to be rich. I was having a conversation recently with somebody that was triggered by the summer of migration, and we were talking about the right of the pursuit of happiness that is actually written into the American Constitution, but of course not into the Swiss Constitution. So there's no right for the pursuit of happiness. So now we were having this conversation about this very basic right, and he told me that there is no such right. So, and I was asking him, okay, but why do you think are you legitimate to have everything just because you were lucky to be born in Switzerland? And he just said, yeah, well, that's bad luck for everyone else. And I think this is part of the, I mean, talking about being civilized, this is, I think, the core of this civilized self-notion of having the right to basically have everything and everyone else having nothing. To put it in a very, in a very drastical way. So this is the question about resources. And there was another part.
Yes, I mean, I think you have answered it, because the question was, why is there a discussion if there's no competition for resources and so on? But I think you were making.
I have one small other point. If we talk about resources, it's not only resources in terms of the basic needs for life, but it's also resources for participating in a society. Because what makes a happy life does not only make having shelter, having food, having clothing, but having also a means of participating in society and being an active part of society. And this citizenship is not granted for 25% of the people in Switzerland. They are not able to, they are not allowed to vote. They are not, a lot of undocumented labor migrants are not, have no means of having access to social security and also other forms of services. And this is also, I would want to add that to this resource question, because it's, I think, if we talk about Switzerland as in terms of who is fighting for the resources, and you have to mention those who don't even show up in the statistics, or who don't even have the means to even ask the question, can I please have, a health insurance, because they are not, this access is completely prohibited from the beginning, and this has a connection in Swiss economy, national economy.
I think that's a very, very important point, because what you're suggesting here is that you have a democratic system that seems comfortable with having part of its people, or part of the people who live within this system, without political rights. Is that a discussion that takes place here politically? Is that something that is raised by people? This contradiction.
Yes. Well, this is what I and others, what we are trying to do, because Switzerland is still labeled as a very, as one of the most, let's say, best practice examples for participatory democracy, which is a joke in itself if you look at the number of people actually participating in this participatory democracy. I think what we are trying to do also at Shedhalle, but also at different other places, is to really make it clear that Switzerland cannot be called a democracy anymore without actually citizenship for everyone. And citizenship as an expanded concept of not only political participation but also cultural participation and access to resources and being free of discrimination.
Well, I can understand why Well, SOP doesn't like you people.
I wanted to add something in terms of competition for resources. I mentioned it, but I made clear that's not the only factor that explains violence. Actually, in all my research and in all my academic discussions, I dispute, I argue against this explanation as an explanation. It can only one of the key factors, but not even the most important. Because if it was, if so many poor areas in South Africa, we will be having the whole country up in flames. But that's not the case. Xenophobic violence is an issue in South Africa, but it's only in a few areas. If you look, foreign nationals are all over in the country. But you can count the number of areas where we have seen violence. So in my arguments, I mean, informed by research, deprivation or material explanations are only a single, small, a background which affects almost communities, but there are other variables that need to be present for that background to become violence. By the way, it's not objective poverty that leads people to feel that way. The notion of relative deprivation is very key. It's not that I'm objective poor, I don't have anything, but the idea that I deserve more than what I have. And I'm not getting what I deserve because you are here. That's relative deprivation. I might not be poor, I might actually be rich, but I feel that's not enough. And I'm not getting what I feel is enough because you're here. But that is the start, that's the beginning. So to cut it short, the other variables, but the key variable in terms of translating these feelings into violence, what is South Africa, is governance. My colleagues are documenting what's going on in Grahamstown now, and they show how local political leaders are the ones behind the violence. Community leadership is key, because if that doesn't recognize the violence itself, with mobilizing communities, it's very weak. It has been taken over by informal leadership groups that organize violence to further their political economic interest, or business groups that want to eliminate the business. But all in that, it becomes to the lack of effective conflict resolution mechanisms. Because whether you like it or not, we have conflicts in our communities, in our love lives, in our families, everywhere. But violence is not an automatic outgrowth of conflict. It doesn't mean that when conflict reaches a certain temperature, it will become violence. No. Violence has its own dynamics, its own direct reasons. And we need to understand those. So one of the issues is, when there is a conflict in those communities, there are no systems that can resolve those conflicts before they become violent. And that's why I framed the whole xenophobic violence in South Africa as a governance issue. And that explains why we have violence in some areas, where we have favorable governance factors, we have violence. When local governance doesn't want it to happen, it doesn't. Because the governance can mobilize communities to resist even those who want to use violence for their own interests.
Well, I think one issue that is becoming clearer now is that you cannot talk about migration without also reflecting on issues of citizenship, political participation, and so on. I think that is also very important. Perhaps one could even say that those people engaging in violence in South Africa are making claims, political claims, because they are citizens and foreigners are not citizens because they do not bear any political rights in the context of South Africa.
Definitely, that's actually what is really taking place, because there is a sense of right and entitlement that the new dispensation has given South Africans, particularly those who were which is disadvantaged, and the expectation is that many got in 1994 or a few years before have not been materialized. There is a sense of frustration because the transformation is slow, expectations are not being met, and then comes the rhetoric of blaming the failures on the outsider, so that becomes a problem. Participation is a buzzword in South African democracy as well, but if you look at it closely, you find it is actually a very discriminatory process. It's a political process that is dominated by the so-called the bona fide residents of the area. Migrants, minorities do not really say what happened in those communities. So participation, at least from what I've seen so far, is always a discriminatory space.
Very good. Katharina, you once organized a very interesting exhibition, Shedhalle, which was about segregation and discrimination here in Switzerland. And I found the way you organized it quite interesting with the justification that you gave for it. It was about the Roma and Sinti, and you basically looked at the prohibition of begging as a way of hiding poverty in Zurich, in this case, which I think is a very interesting idea. Now, what other forms does the hiding of discrimination, segregation take here in Switzerland?
I mean, hiding poverty or prohibiting poverty through displacing people who are begging for money is not, I mean, it's not something that I observed as the first one in history, but I mean, it's like a known strategy in how cities are, let's say, developed, because this is the phrase that is used. Yeah, if you develop a city, you make it, you basically organize it around questions of consumerism, of a certain way, and coming back to this question of participation or of Teilhabe, social participation, organize it around questions that are economized, or that are questions of economy and not social questions of, for example, conflicts or like core questions of democracy. So we were interested in these contradictions in Switzerland, also being this very particular, very peculiar island in the middle of Europe. So the title of the exhibition was "Switzerland is not an island," and the aim was to show and to trace the connections of Switzerland within a global world, and also within the history of colonialism and the history of different racist and anti-Semitic discourses. Because it was a coincidence that there was a commemoration of Richard Wagner as a political refugee who came to Zurich from Dresden as a political refugee because he, you know, I mean, he was a little bit afraid that he might be persecuted as a political activist. So he came to Zurich and he could flourish and he could write and he could, just enjoy the beauty of the Swiss mountains and go for walks around the Zurich lake. So this was written on the website of Zurich Tourism about the commemoration of Richard Wagner. So Richard Wagner is a political refugee. We nourished him, he flourished, he wrote all these operas, and so to say, we were asking ourselves, okay, so let's do it with everyone. If everyone can flourish, if everyone can be such a genius, you know. And the other side of the coin was then, of course, that what he wrote in Zurich was not, I mean, it also was very problematic in terms of the content, because he wrote the manifest that was called Judaism in Culture, and it was an anti-Semitic manifesto about how Jews cannot participate in culture because they are not, they should be actually excluded from culture because they are not German and like anti-Semitic ideology. So we were kind of we wanted to go to trace this this relation of Switzerland to global regimes of migration, to the visual inclusion of certain aspects of the global city, of cosmopolitanism, and to the exclusion of the very people who are part of global migration flows. So this has a lot to do also with image politics and how cities are imagineering their own surface, and how Zurich also wants to be a global city, and the mayor of Zurich is always manifesting everyone who lives here is a part of Zurich. So I think what has to be done in art, or what we try to do, is also to make sense of these contradictions and to really show them and to bring them to the surface, but then also to intervene and to suggest concrete concepts of how institutions can be changed. We also are very strict about our own institutional anti-discriminatory politics. And then in our current project we are developing models of urban citizenship, and we are actually acting not as artists who look at the bright side and the beautiful side, but we are developing models of urban citizenship and really suggesting them to stakeholders and to political decision makers. So we are acting as, let's say, an agency for political utopia, and then suggesting it into and creating a framework of negotiation. And this project is called The Whole World in Zurich. So it's let's say, also imagining Zurich as a real part of a global world, and it's still up to be seen in the Shedhalle too. So this is the current project.
It's still on.
It's still on. I brought also some flyers with me. I hate when people do that, because I always think, why are they always talking about their own project? But I wanted to show you this nice, what's it called? Rettungsring in English. Like a safety. Well, a safety ring. So coming back to a lifeguard ring to really Zurich being a place, a sanctuary place, a place where you can arrive and really
feel safe.
Exactly.
If you're not German. Okay, but because you talked about Richard Wagner, I had to think of what Mark Twain said about him, that his music is better than it sounds. Okay. I think we should have some questions from the public. So I want to open the floor now to you to ask questions. Yes.
I'm still thinking it, because it's a question that's been in my mind for quite a long time. And it was sparked also with what Pierre was saying. That
can you take the microphone?
Jean-Pierre was saying, the South African experience around xenophobia, as Jean-Pierre was saying, doesn't always make sense. You know, this doesn't seem to be a logic. So yes, it is a kind of rejection of the person who's come from outside the borders, and it's not everybody. So it finds its expression in certain pockets. So a number of my colleagues come from various parts of Africa and was never in any danger because they would live in certain areas and so on. So I'm just wondering whether part of this phenomenon of xenophobia has got to do with the way we imagine nations. You know, it's got to do with imagining. So South Africa, just having come through a process of apartheid, is in the process of beginning to imagine what it means to be South African. And in that process of imagination, racism enters. It's a form of kind of structural racism in which people are excluded because they're not given political rights. So I'm just thinking in terms of how political imagination, or how we imagine the political community, is often a trigger or allows xenophobia in our South African context to happen. And then there's the other area that I question that's bubbling in my head is the whole issue around violence, not as being a physical violence. Violence is also exclusion is violence. Not allowing people to participate is also violence. And how, in a context of violence being experienced, it makes it possible to come through with kind of physical violence, because we are experiencing violence at all levels, at all time, you know? So it's just some thoughts.
Let's take another one.
If I think back when I was 15 years old, we had the first foreign people, the first foreign workers coming to Switzerland, the Italians. And they were singing when they were working, just imagine. And that was one thing which was strange for many Swiss people, because if you work, then it's a serious job. And the second thing was that for us young girls, we liked it, that they were looking afterwards, they were saying hello, things like that. And I think we did not have probably too many. It was digestible. And only when we had the German people coming, very quickly the people said, oh, they are so proud, and they, with their high German, how they speak, they come from the big country, and they are think they are more valuable than we are. It's interesting how a population can go into building opposing ideas which are shared. And this I would like to know from you all. Did you experience this too? That how we managed with the Italians, and then with the Germans we were very, very distant to these people.
Thank you.
Just a quick, not to be responsible, but a quick comment on what you said. It is very true that not every foreign national in South Africa experiences xenophobia in the same way. Even people coming from the same country don't experience in the same way. Yeah. Some Nigerians don't fit. I mean, I'm from Burundi. I don't fit like any other Burundian. Which once again shows that it's not only there are other variables involved. And one of those variables is the perception of threat that particular individual represents to a certain group of interest, certain group, in certain space. If a Mozambican is there doing whatever they do, they choose, and they're not competing with the businesses, and the more pressing issues about Somalis who are now competing with the local trading, the form of trading, you see it will be only Somalis who is going to be targeted and attacked and removed, because they are seen as a threat to that particular group, interest group. So foreign nationals in a certain country, they experience xenophobia and different manifestations according to the threat they are perceived to represent. So yeah, depending on how you live, what space and what you are seen as in terms of people who live in those areas. Imagine national community, political community. Yeah, this is a very good and very serious thing we all have to look at. Any time we try the formation of a group identity, we are embarking on inclusion, exclusion exercise. A group identity means membership and non-membership. So South Africa apartheid, with its own exclusions, and we all know that. South Africa has started a project of the new South African identity. And if you attend the discussions, that national identity does not include foreign nationals, not at all. It's about black and whites. Yeah, and you know, in South African context, Indians and the others also part of, they're black, yeah. So it's about black and whites. The discussion doesn't include foreign nationals living from the countries. Social cohesion issues, it's about black and whites, about addressing the imbalances of the past, does not include foreigners, South Africans coming from other countries, even if sometimes they have to be nationals at some point, they have to be citizens. But the one thing we need to understand all about is that any group identity means there are those who are excluded from it. And if that exclusion is not carefully managed, it leads to conflict. And that's very, very tricky. Xenophobia. The variables I gave earlier were about explaining variance, how xenophobia translates to variance, but I didn't say anything about xenophobia itself. Where does it come from? Where do feelings come from? There are two schools of thought, yeah, in terms of xenophobia. Now, not variance. Xenophobia is an attitude, the feeling people have about others. Two schools of thought. One is xenophobia is inherent in human nature. Do you agree? Do you agree that xenophobia is part of us, is in our nature? Okay. Hold on a second. Hold on. Next time you visit a family with a newborn, try to touch it. Do you scream?
Yeah.
Yeah? So, the fear of unknown is part of our human nature. It's our survival instinct. Because we don't know what to expect. We don't know what's going to happen. What if this person is going to harm me? So, the first reaction is, no, let me check it out first. Come on. No. That kid hasn't been a part of any socialization. Yeah? It's just like, it's an instinct. Wait a moment. But what happens afterward is, once the kid sees that you are not there to harm him, it starts warming up to you. Yeah? After checking it out though. Yeah? So the second school of thought is xenophobia is a social and political construction. We are born okay, it's what you parents tell us that make us bad and we hate others. I'm not here to judge or to conclude, but you can see that there is merit in both. There is merit. Usually that fear should disappear once the person realizes that you're not there to harm them. But when the socialization continues to paint you as a threat, that's why it never disappears. It continues actually leading to now even more hatred and more fear and more aggression and more violence. So all those schools present actually very valuable arguments and evidence to show that even animals and territory and stuff, yeah, we have to survive. Sometimes surviving means including and excluding, and national identities and ethnic identities means we include and exclude. So, but yeah, that's one of the. The other things we didn't mention, we talked about violence, we forgot other forms of xenophobic manifestations. It's not only violence, but we can call it symbolic violence, because it doesn't have to be pangas and killing. When you deny me services I deserve because I'm a foreign national, that's a xenophobic practice, and that's a form of violence itself. The police harassment and distortion on the streets of the country. Foreign nationals get deported, and even South Africans who are light-skinned like me, they are mistaken for foreign nationals. They are deported and they come back. So, political pronouncements in parliaments by president, by others, who those make those inflammatory statements that frame, encourage people's behavior and fuel all these negative attitudes and then lead to violence because they know this is now a mission from the top. And of course, violence, which is mostly by the main violence, the violence we know that is mostly by ordinary citizens. But violence is not the only thing. And so now, if you look at those different forms of manifestations, who are the perpetrators of xenophobic practice of violence? Almost everyone. It's not just the poor and informal settlements. It's the bureaucrats, the police, it's the politicians, it's us. Sometimes in academia it also gets there. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about now, but I want to come back shortly to the first aspect of your comment. And mention briefly Sandro Mezzadra's work on the border as a method, where he describes the border as a prisma, as a filter that is that is selecting, that is organizing selection in terms of economical and other aspects of let's say usability or how do you say that? Brauchbarkeit, the usefulness of human resources in the end. This is what it comes down to, and this is also connected to your comment about who is seen as a problem and who is not seen as a problem in terms of how our perception is framed. I wanted to mention a story that Nikita Davan mentioned when she was in Zurich a few months ago at a conference that a few of us, also Sarah is here, we organized a conference on critical migration studies, and she told a story about herself being at the Munich train station, and she was with her, she's a professor, she was with her little bag rolling, and then she had a fancy suit, and then next to her was somebody who was just traveling through Europe, on pursuit of happiness, and then she was not even looked at by the police because she was performing a certain usefulness. So I want just to add this to to this discussion on violence, and this is a very subtle form, and this is a very bureaucratic form, and this is a form that is not very visible, but that is very, very effective.
Thank you.
I'm just back from Zimbabwe, and there the police, they have roadblocks, and it depends on the type of car whether you are stopped or not. So I think that's, it just came to my mind, that's not the question I wanted to ask. I realized that the structural exclusion is like omnipresent. It's not within what we do, it's there in all the structures in our society. But I was asking myself about those who instrumentalize these feelings of xenophobia. We have political instrumentalization, and I wonder what exclusion and discrimination in Switzerland would look like without a party like the SVP. We would still have it, I think, but what's the difference of those who instrumentalize on these feelings? And I think it's the same for South Africa. We have been mildly talking about the government's responsibility, and there are so many different stories. It's different in every local place, how the interests combine to get people to become violent. It can be the police, it can be local business people, it can be local politicians, it can be to divert people's anger from those they should call to task and blame the foreigners. In Grahamstown it was the Taxi Drivers Association. They wanted to blame the government for not mending the roads. And then somebody spread a rumor about unresolved murders. And then the anger was diverted to the foreigners. So I would like to hear more about people who use it for their own benefits.
Good evening. My name is Cindy. I'm from South Africa. I would like to add from my colleague in Johannesburg when he's saying that the problem with this xenophobic attack, it comes from the government. Yeah, of course, yes. I would like to agree with him because the lack of service delivery from the government is getting the people from outside South Africa getting blamed by the South Africans. How? These people from outside South Africa, they come in South Africa with their knowledge, with their skills, and of course, they can come and start the businesses, and their businesses are successful, and the South Africans are becoming greedy because they cannot do what the people are doing. Yes, we'll talk more tomorrow about this, but I really, really agree with him. It is the cause of the government. I've seen this in the informal settlement. It's not only happening on the people like on the African countries, even in South Africa, where the people that are speaking in Xhosa, coming from KwaZulu, from Eastern Cape to KwaZulu-Natal. Those people come from the rural places where there is no jobs, and they come obvious for the universities and all the other stuff in KwaZulu-Natal. And you'll find out the government will say these people will not get the housing in KwaZulu-Natal, they must go back to Eastern Cape. They will live in the shack for the rest of their life because they're here to work, because they don't have a right to have the housing in KwaZulu-Natal because they're speaking in Xhosa. So xenophobic is not like, according to what I've seen, it's not like for the people coming outside South Africa. It's even in South Africa, it's happening. In South Africa, we do have Indians, we've got Chinese, we've got all kinds of people coming outside South Africa. But you only see the xenophobic attack only directed to the people that are coming from Africa. Why? It's because of their skills, of course. We don't have skills in South Africa. It's because of our government. So we people, we're not supposed to blame the people from Africa. We're supposed to blame our government, not the people coming from Africa. They are not the cause of what we are now. It's our government that caused what we are. We've been made poor by our government, not by the people from Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would have a question to both of. So, I think, would you agree that one can see xenophobia as part of nationalism? Just a specific form of nationalism, but it's nothing new. But what I would like to know, what do you propose as an alternative? Because basically, people tend to, and probably all of us, to use a group or whatever identity to claim certain rights, to claim support. You can do that as, I'm a South African, I would like the government to help me and not the others. I'm a Swiss, I would like to have whatever my pension secured, etc. And you will never hear very rich people be xenophobic, because they, thanks to their individual income, they're on the safe side. They like each other, that's no problem. Or not really a problem. But even the university lecturers, if they suddenly are told, as they are now, for instance, at UWC, no, we stop your salary. We don't increase your salary because fees must fall. Then the tension starts. And I was wondering what you see as an alternative for a non-religious person. They don't accept God.
The last part is very important.
So I would ask you to comment on the, I think the answer was suggested already. You should deport Roja.
I was also wanting to suggest that. I mean, I didn't really understand what you mean with alternative. Do you mean an alternative to xenophobia?
What kind of group identity do you offer?
I'm not a fan of group identities. I can pass on this question because I'm not a fan of group identities. I think
so you're individualist, completely.
No, I would.
You're rich enough to look after yourself until you die.
I would suggest the concept of solidarity.
For me, that's too vague.
That's what?
That's
vague.
That's too vague. Solidarity, of course, we are all. But what does that mean?
Should I go on about solidarity? I can go on for a long time about solidarity. I would suggest, very short, like 3 sentences about solidarity. Non-identitarian solidarity. Solidarity can never be based on identity, on this, like on sharing the same identity. But I would suggest that now in the world we live now, that we are facing, I would say the end of such things as nations. I think the nation as a concept is not anymore very, has not a lot of future, I would say. So the question is how to organize the commons, like how to live together, even if you are divided by social injustice, by racism, by sexism, by different forms of oppression. And the concept of solidarity, I would suggest, is to really have a strategic alliance about a society that you want to achieve that is beyond all those forms of oppression, because they are connected.
Can you say something about Barbara's question concerning those who make use of migration for political?
I don't think that that we should make the mistake of thinking that only the right wing is profiting from racism. I think that this is a concept that it is that the very core of a lot of European governments is organized around nationalism. A lot of unions is having very nationalist ideas about whose advocates they are, concerning labor markets and the idea of the So I think if we only focus on the right wing, that what was often also called populism, I don't agree. I think that this is just that they are just a symptom of a certain lack in the middle of society which used to be called social democracy. That the racism within social democracy is very much non-explicit, and it's very much a taboo, but it's still systematic within the policies that you can see or that you could observe. I would say for the example of Austria, since the 70s and the 80s, the social democratic governments were very exclusionary and racist, and they passed all the laws about the racist segregation of the labor market, and they passed a lot of citizenship right laws that are nothing to be called except racist. So I think the right wing, what they are doing is just economizing a certain image of being the bad guys. They profit from this being able to be incorrect, politically incorrect, and especially with the example of Austria, I think we must be very much aware that the Freedom Party is having 40% of their votes from a very young age group, between 16 and 30. So 40% of their voters are very young, and this segment of society that is called unpolitical, and they are very much addressed by this notion of being incorrect, of being beyond the normal politics. So I think this is something that we have to think about. What does it mean for a certain style of politics that we are facing? I think that populism is not only executed by the right wing, but that a certain form of post-political attitude is to be found in many parties, and that racism is not something that only the right wing is doing.
I think I can use one to respond to both questions. There is a guy at Wits who wrote a report about that. The title is "The Smoke That Calls," trying to answer why sometimes taxi associations can attack foreign nationals no particular reason, just to attract the attention of the government that has been ignoring them for a long time. So that smoke is going to, especially when it's foreign nationals, NGOs, international media will be there. They are sure they will get that response they have been trying to get from them. They need it. Once again, coming back to the lack of confidentiality mechanisms, issues are there. People complain. Nobody responds. They respond when violence erupts. So sometimes, like in that case, taxi associations, they were just calling the government to come to listen to their grievances, and the finals become just the fact that it's a smoke that calls in some instances. But in other instances, it's the way you put it is instrumentalism around chasing away foreign nationals. Because as I said, although in South Africa, to be honest, there has been talks about the third force behind the violence, but our research doesn't find it. The third force is in South Africa, where the right wing from the apartheid era wanted to destabilize the government using violence in local areas, like having a central command somewhere and telling people what to do. No, that's not the case. The violence is organized and led by local players in their space without necessary coordination from what province or national level. No, that space. But that also speaks to instrumental motives for those local level political leaders. So the incentives, political, economic, are very easy for everyone to see, and that's why I was saying it goes beyond attitudes. And those who try to design interventions need to understand those incentives. The concern now is that because the political base of the ruling party is in those spaces, and now the political base doesn't want foreigners in those specific spaces. What do you do if you are a political leader? What do you do? That's the dark side of democracy. Democracy, we always say it's a good thing everywhere, it's here, but ask the German Chancellor right now. She will tell you what she will. She rating refugees as a humanitarian gesture. Now she's taking a flag from the citizens, saying, what did you do that? How could you retain too many? Yeah. So what's happening in South Africa now? South Africa actually is now trying to revise its refugee regime, its migration laws. It had an open policy, integration policy. You come into the country, they give you papers, you go, you live wherever you want in the country, you look after yourself. But because of now the voices from the political base, we don't want these people here, they're competing with us. I think our businesses. South Africa is now reviewing that policy, is actually trying to bring back the camps in the country. So very soon we might see camps. They have already closed a number of refugee reception centers in Cape Town and Joburg and the other areas. So very soon we might see camps in South Africa because of that pressure from the political base. So it's a very serious matter. Alternative. What do I propose? I don't think there is a possibility of living without identities, because some identities are primordial. It's not like something you get because of socialization. Gender identity, race, is something you can't do anything about. Some of those we have to be there. So groups' identities for me are not a problem at all. They'll always be there. The problem is when group identities are politicized. That's when they become a problem. I mean, difference. We are all different in some ways. And sometimes we don't really think about it. But when somebody comes, has an interest, a benefit, and sentimental motives and they feel they can achieve it through activating that difference that's already there, then that's when it becomes chaos. So I wouldn't mind some people have tried to suppress group identities. In Burundi, the president, the leaders removed, we used to have 20 ethnic identities in our identity books. They removed them. No, we are all Burundians, that's fine, but it has not stopped ethnic violence. We know who we are. I don't need to read it in the identity book, do I? No. So what I would like to see myself, it's not what I would like to preach. It's not universal love. No. I would like to preach rule of law. Simple. You are who you are, I'm who I am. We all have rights. And once again, I come back to the issue of governance. If I violate your rights, there are mechanisms to make sure. Because in many cases, when people see violence, they say it's irrational, it's chaotic, this is no. Violence is a rational choice. People make after weighing up the costs and benefits. And usually, when the benefits outweigh the costs, well, who doesn't want benefit from things, especially when in the context of scarce resources and stuff. So, for me, group identities, we are different. Difference is not a problem for me. It becomes a problem when it politicized for political or economic motives, and the rule of law can solve the problem. But who do we trust with the rule of law? That's the problem. Our leaders are the ones behind the chaos taking place. So, unless we have leaders who are able to make sure the rule of law is observed, we will have all these differences and conflict, because otherwise, having a way without group identities, I don't even think I would like to be part of that, because there's things we can't do anything about. But it doesn't mean that there's enough space for all of us.
Well, thank you very much. Time is up. And the idea was to introduce the issues, and I think our guests did that very well. They whet our appetite for what's coming tomorrow. We will have many more presentations tomorrow, which will go even deeper into the issues. We are starting at 8:30 tomorrow here. And 8:30 is registration, 9 o'clock is the time. So it's the time when we start, and we will start straight away with a presentation which is going to be given by Mervyn Abrahams, and then we'll go on with Sarah.
And Cindy.
Oh, and Cindy, sorry, I'm sorry. I can't see women.
That's discrimination.
Yes. And Sarah Schillinger will also talk tomorrow on Switzerland. And Jean-Pierre will also have an opportunity to talk tomorrow again. And then in the afternoon, there's going to be a roundtable discussion that Lucy Kirchlin is going to chair. So thank you very much. It was very nice having you here. It was very interesting listening to you. It was very interesting getting your questions and your interest, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow.